And we're back with another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we give you some straight up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. Today we're talking about Serious Sam 4, some quick impressions. This is another outing for the Serious Sam series. We've been playing a review copy of it for the last couple of days, and this is another outing for the series. It's a quirky series. It celebrates old school, mindless and violent, but skill-based PC, mouse and keyboard shooting stuff. Gore, weird monsters, crazy weapons, big dumb levels, corny one-liners. That's what these games are kind of about. And some context for me, I've only kind of dabbled in the Serious Sam games, but I do enjoy shooters in this type of hardcore old school PC genre. Rise of the Triad, Quake, Hexen, Duke Nukem, and more recently Dusk. I just kind of love blasting shit and getting motion sickness. I'm not very good at them. You know, I never was, because growing up I had to use library computers because I didn't have money for my own. But I can't help but love these types of games. They have a special place in my heart, and so with that, I'm gonna come out and say, I think Serious Sam 4 is a good video game fun time. First impressions are, it's maybe not the best Serious Sam or anything, you know, maybe the cracks are starting to show, but the game is exactly what it set out to be. I can't help but enjoy a game that lets you dual-wield double-barreled shotguns, you know? So what is Serious Sam 4? Straight up first-person shooting, you know, with not really much else of anything surrounding it. I'll explain it to you like it's all your first Serious Sam game, because using the developer's own words here, the approach was kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's a large-scale, sort of arena-based shooting that's really all about using the right tool for the right enemy, but more importantly, just positioning and movement. You know, every enemy is like a puzzle, and sometimes the game is throwing 100 puzzle pieces at you at once. Some enemies, you know, a lot of enemies you need to constantly strafe while you engage. Many enemies explode when you get too close. Some swarm you, some teleport. So you're constantly circle strafing and just backtracking and shooting while going backwards, moving super fast. Some of these enemies really need to be perfectly dodged though, and they kind of throw a wrench into you just blowing down endless hordes of enemies, which is what it usually is. Many enemies explode if they get too close. Some swarm you, some pummel you instantly, some have spread fire, some get right up close in your face, and some are absolutely massive, and those are some of the best, I think. Basically, you go through levels from large area to large area, and a bunch of enemies spawn in, and you kill them. Now, I know that might not sound like much. You know, what is this, a one-trick pony? But, like, it kind of isn't, because the game is simple and it knows what it is. It's a fun, mindless shooter. Sometimes you need that. Take your frustrations out, circle strafe around, and blow up some monsters. Now, the gameplay might look boring to you because the game does essentially give you 3 main levels, and they all kind of have their own visual style, and that's it. You know, the 3 main levels, that does sound slight, but each one is broken up into multiple chapters, and honestly, most of each of the main level things are pretty lengthy. They progress really well thanks to simple mission objectives and the game pretty consistently introducing you to either new enemies or new weapons and stuff. It keeps you interested and it keeps things fresh and keeps you going. The game also gives you a super simple side objective here and there where you can basically divert from your main linear path and go elsewhere. Usually just with a unique little side showdown with a bunch of enemies. You'll find a thing or meet a character, and you usually get a weapon or an important gadget or upgrade. So basically, most of the side pursuits are pretty worthwhile and worth the extra challenge of an extra shootout or two in a level. And that's good because the levels are really boring. I know that's always kind of been Serious Sam's thing, but here I'm just really starting to feel it, you know? Basically, most levels feel like some flat maze-like or just long hallway and then some wide open spaces. But then every so often, you know, the game does surprise you a little bit with like a big valley or just some cool uses of more verticality and level design that you don't typically see in these types of games, and some other weirder scenarios. Strafing around these big arenas is fun though, you know, just managing positioning so you don't get stuck on a tree or get cornered in the end of the map. That is cool. But when they throw in more stuff like enemies perched above you and maybe like a labyrinth thrown in the middle and big nasty enemies just endlessly running towards you and chasing you, that's where it can get really creative and challenging. But otherwise, the actual looks and feels of the level, most of the time, it's kind of just whatever. But the game's new tech does allow a truly impressive amount of enemies to be thrown at you, all with their own different speeds, attack patterns, and technically artificial intelligence, I guess. They're all running towards you constantly, wanting to kill you. It can get pretty chaotic, and the game offers a few difficulty modes. This gameplay is on normal, and you can see it gets very hectic very fast. The game also has a few moments where it gives you massive battlefields with like thousands of enemies on screen at once. This stuff is really impressive, but I really really wish there was more of this, or just a bit more of an interesting use of it, you know? It is still, just in gameplay, really satisfying figuring out how to deal with each new enemy once they show up, especially if you're a newcomer. The game has like a codex database you can quickly access at any time if you do want a bit of a tip on how to beat an enemy, but seriously, nothing is more satisfying than knowing exactly how to dodge a charging enemy, spin around, blast them to gory bits with a super shotgun all within like a millisecond. This is like a Twitch crazy shooter. You know, you fire lots of shots and your mouse sensitivity better be high, but it's so addictive because it does require a little bit of practice and a little bit of skill. And while we're on it, I wish there were even more new enemies, because the new ones here are a bit hit and miss. But they look cool, they're gross and disgusting, and most importantly, they're fun to murder. There are 15 weapons and some new ones like an auto shotgun, and the weapons all range from traditional to obnoxious to weird and sci-fi, and many of them have attachment upgrades you can get to give it an alternate fire with a right click, like adding a grenade launcher to your regular shotgun. Items also shake things up, you know, like throwing down a decoy that then kind of moves around the area and says stupid catchphrases to lure enemies towards it and draw aggro away from you, which you're definitely going to need a breather here and there. One of my other favorites, there's a rage potion you can get to that puts you in like an overdrive mode. There's a lot of fun stuff to mess around with here and kind of shake things up here and there. And you also earn upgrade points that you can spend in a skill tree called the SAM. You know, you'd think like a skill tree in a very old school, simple style shooter game like this doesn't need to be a thing, but it works surprisingly well here. Spend a point to unlock dual wielding, or get back some health when punching enemies, or unlock the ability to do melee attacks to different type of enemies, or even mount some of the bigger enemies. Most of the skill tree stuff is practical and useful, so it's rewarding. Now you'll notice this is a campaign and I've barely mentioned the story. That's because it doesn't really matter. I give the developers credit for putting in a story. You know, it's something extra to keep you going through, but it's extremely hokey, and characters interacting with one another just isn't really very entertaining or much to look at, really. You join Serious Sam Stone and his band of goofy sidekick warriors in a fight against an invading alien god force. Sam himself is a t-shirt, sunglasses, tough-talking dude spouting one-liners, and he's surrounded by a group of tough-talking mercenaries spouting one-liners. It sounds like it can get old fast, and I will say, yeah, it kind of does, and I love dumb, goofy shit. Thankfully, the game is self-aware, and there are definitely a few chuckles here and there. That, you know, Joe Lynch as a comedic relief rookie Kenny does a really good job entertaining, but cutscenes just feel awkward and don't look very good, often just kind of janky or glitchy. You know, characters downright are outdated and robotic, like yikes. With the story, I think some of the jokes make it a good outing, but ultimately still definitely the weakest part of the game. It gives a little more context to the Serious Sam universe, which is cool, I guess, but this really isn't the reason you're here. It's the gameplay, and like I've saying, I think it mostly provides. On the visual front, I don't think it looks very good either. The best thing about it is it having a high frame rate on a high refresh monitor. Other than that, like I said, the cutscenes aren't much to look at all, and there are some cool vistas here and there with some nice foliage, but otherwise the game looks bland as hell. Even the more hellish levels feel boring to look at. Oh, and also, if we're talking about just menu stuff with multiple difficulty modes and a lot of graphical options and control options, there's also 4-player online co-op, which is very important to these games, and it's absolutely welcomed here. The game is fun on your own, but blowing away even bigger hordes of enemies with a friend by your side while you talk shit, that's pretty good. This is, like I've been saying, it's a crazy arcade shooter. You know, it's dumb, but I mean dumb in a good way. It's simple, it knows what it is, and it's not like a high-end AAA massive budget blockbuster shooter. You know, it's just a video game-ass video game, warts and all. And I always say it, and I sound like a broken record, but we need these types of games in this tier in the video game industry, even if they're flawed. So I'd say Serious Sam 4 is something you should consider if you want mindless shooting. It's not a full-price game, and the offering is a little light, but over time, with some mods added in that the developers are supporting, and whatever else typically tends to grow out of this series after launch, is definitely worth keeping an eye on. Now, I will say, if you are new to the series, don't start with this one. I'd say jump in and play the older ones first, so then you can kind of get what the deal is. Because I will say overall, Serious Sam 4 doesn't feel as mind-blowing fun as previous Sam games. I think the well is starting to dry up a little bit here, but one more outing like this was fine and very entertaining, just blowing things away. If you can't tell by how I'm describing it, like, it's all definitely like a game. It's like a, hey, it is what it is. This is the type of game you get. This, what you see is what you get. And I know some old school first-person shooter fans want no bullshit whatsoever, so here's a fine, mindless shooter to pass the time. You get a shotgun, things go boom, blood goes everywhere. But of course, that's just me, and this is a before you buy. You know how it goes down by now. I give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion, and now I want to hear yours down in the comments. Are you a fan of this series? What do you think about Serious Sam 4? Anything at all about this series? Let's talk. If you enjoyed this video though, maybe we helped you out, clicking the like button does help us, and subscribing if you're new is also a good idea, because we put out videos every single day, and we have a lot more before you buy videos to come. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.